more and more musicians reaching out to me, both in the secular world and also in, the Christian music industry, worship leaders, singer songwriters. They are awakening to this understanding and wanting to make that shift. So it's really exciting, I think. And I think the Lord is exposing it for such a time as this. I haven't followed super close what's happening in the music industry because I've been traveling the last couple of weeks, but just knowing what happened with P. Diddy's arrest and then some of these big name CEOs of music industries stepping down, resigning. I believe the Lord is exposing what's been hidden in the shadows. And that's one of the things that I want to help us understand, because these frequencies have been weaponized, and there's actually a more sinister assault using these frequencies to torture and program people that have been enslaved in satanic ritual abuse. And, one of the things that I'm so grateful for, having, once my first book was published and I started speaking about it, it opened doors for me to be able to build relationships with people coming out of satanic ritual abuse, and also those that have been ministering to these people. And I have learned so much. In fact, I have a dear friend, Andrea Reinberg, and she's with a ministry called Four Corners Free. Her and her husband do deliverance and deprogramming. Well, she really helps me understand the impact that frequency has in programming individuals. And so I want to share for a few minutes how this has been weaponized. But I just want to give a little bit of a trigger warning, because what I'll share in the next maybe 3 or 4 minutes can be pretty dark, but I promise I will bring it back up and distribute hope and share with your listeners, how can we break free from the weaponization of music and frequencies. So one of the things that Andrea shared with me is, the mind control programming process is actually dependent on frequencies. That's because frequencies open portals. So the more intense the emotions that are stirred up in a child, the lower the resonance. And then at extreme levels of torture, portals are actually opened up for deceased Nephilim to come into our dimension in physical form. So they can enter into a host, which is what I talk about in my books, Nephilim hosts, or they can appear as a separate being. They can come looking like humans, or they can come in this form of a hideous creature. They're shapeshifters, and that increases their deception. Well, children are tortured emotionally, physically, and spiritually. They're connected to Nephilim in rituals, and they're forced to hand over access to their body, their minds, and even shattered parts of their spirit. Well, they don't remember these pacts because of the trauma. And so often the programs are running in their subconscious mind. One of the things that we have to realize is that our thoughts can actually be read by Nephilim. See, our thoughts are frequencies, and negative thoughts produce these negative frequencies that Nephilim can pick up on. And I'll tie this into scripture. Ecclesiastes 10:20 says, "Curse not the king, no, not in thy thought, and curse not the rich in thy bedchamber. For a bird of the air shall carry the voice, and that which hath wings shall tell the matter." So at times, birds in scripture are a representation of demons. And we see this more clearly in Mark 4, the parable of the sower. So the seed that is thrown on the path, the birds come in and snatch it up. Well, when Jesus was explaining this parable to his disciples in verse 15, he says, "Some people are like the seed along the path where the word is sown. As soon as they hear it, Satan comes and takes away the word that was sown in them." So Jesus is equating the birds to Satan. Now, we also know from scripture that Satan is not omnipresent. He can't be in multiple locations at once. We also know that he's called the prince of the air. So the phrase birds of the air in scripture is oftentimes referring to demons or the departed spirits of the Nephilim who are partnering with Satan to carry out his bidding. Well, so these verses in Ecclesiastes are telling us that what we think can be carried away by the Nephilim. So our negative thoughts then are used against us to plot our own oppression. And that's why it's so important to take every thought captive. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, casting down imaginations and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. Well, with the programming, these frequencies are trained in certain parts of the brain to respond to certain sounds, and oftentimes that's subliminal. So a person is tortured while hearing a frequency, and the torture doesn't stop until the child learns to use the power of the demons to pick up the sound and then perform the desired response. Now, what programmers will do is they oftentimes will use movies to program the behavior that's demanded. And I'll give you an example. The Sound of Music is one that is used because it shows the domineering father blowing a whistle and the children comply. It also shows the Nazis blowing a whistle before they enter into a monastery. And so the child is taught by the programmers that they are to be allowed access to this child's mind every time a frequency is sent. And this is how the child learns absolute submission to particular frequencies. Well, their thoughts are then monitored so that there's no defiance left. And when the child is so hopeless that they want to die, the programmers know that their objective have been reached. From that point, they then take the child and they train it to believe that the only way it can escape the torture is if they give up their rights to humanity and become a Nephilim, like Nimrod became a Gabor. And so then they're trained to search and hunt for souls to feed the Nephilim. And this is from Ezekiel 13:20. It says, behold, I am against your magic charms by which you hunt souls there like birds. I will tear them from your arms and let the souls go. This is the Father speaking. The souls you hunt like birds, I will also tear off your veils and deliver my people out of your hand, and they shall no longer be as prey in your hand. Then you shall know that I am the Lord. Well, so these frequencies are then used to tell the child to open up their brain to the flow of traffic in the spiritual realm. And the child becomes like this super highway of spirits, both demonic and human spirits. Now, there's signs that this is happening with an individual. And some of these signs, you'll see like random stomach bloating, headaches, confusion, ringing of the ears, this sense of like a heavy weight on top of your head, difficulty breathing or sleeping. They might have erratic behavior, nightmares, and foggy thinking. These are just some of the signs that this is happening. Well, ringing in the ears is interesting because that actually can be a sign that there's a fractured part of the child that is operating as the programmer to dominate the rest of the mind and to bring it into submission. Ringing of the ears can also be coming from an outside source. And, you think about satellites. Satellites are used to track people and to send signals. And that's because, we each have our own unique brain wave resonance. So the only way to escape those satellite tracking is through the power of Christ. Now, the other thing that she told me is that frequencies not only are sent to individuals, but they're sent to regions and they can be sent worldwide. So for survivors, they're used to stir up the fear of the original programming event, and that causes them to vibrate at that certain frequency. Well, that frequency is then sent all throughout the earth, and it's kind of like the super highway to everyone that was programmed according to that frequency. So it activates them. It also can be used to increase the terror of real-time events. I think about the war in Israel, or even with COVID. COVID is an example of that. So you have the survivor releases the frequency to the people in the war, in Israel or in Ukraine or wherever. And that stirs up terror for the people in the war. And that terror escalates and then it's sent worldwide. So even people who were never programmed by those frequencies begin feeling hopelessly terrified of evil. And again, I think this is what happened with COVID. Fear got sent around the earth and people got programmed and were trapped in those fearful mindsets. Well, demons can ride on frequencies through our technology. And, they're attached to songs, they're attached to sounds. And, as I mentioned, music is used extensively to program because it bypasses logic. Well, back to your question earlier about, how much do these musicians understand? Shane Lynch of Boyzone, he confirmed some of what Andrea shared with me in an interview in 2023. And I'll just read you a couple of excerpts from this interview. He said, "I've been in rooms at the top of the top where albums are prayed over demonically. Music is prayed over demonically that goes out to the radio stations, to the public. When you see that stuff, it's frightening." And then the interviewer asked, "What do you mean by prayed over demonically?" He said, "Rituals, ceremonies, everything to give light to the devil, to Satan. It's a satanic music industry." Well, even more alarming is back in 1999, there was a band or a group called Foremost Poets, and they wrote a song called Moonraker. And the lyrics tell us exactly how the Nephilim agenda has weaponized music and